I've been practicing medicine for over 25 years, and I've seen it. The world is hurting, people are sick, and even with our greatest scientific discoveries and technological breakthroughs, trends in health are not getting better. We weren't designed for this. This world as we know it, it's not our home. But there is a remedy. Our Creator designed us to be resilient creatures, and He's given us clues in the scriptures that have dramatic implication for our lives today. Let's talk about biblical prescriptions. Let's take a serious look at living as God intended. Are you ready? Let's get well, and let's go home.
Welcome to the Biblical Prescriptions for Life podcast. I'm your host, Nick Evanson, here with Dr. James Marcum, author of the 7-week Bible study, Biblical Prescriptions for Life. On today's podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about Dr. Marcum's book, Medicines That Kill, and more broadly about the dangers of medications specifically related to heart disease and cardiology. So Dr. Marcum, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Nick. It's good to be here, and I'm glad that all of our listeners that are, or people that might watch it are tuning in, and we like to hear from you. It always makes our day.
That's right.
Because you never know if you're reaching somebody. And just today I had one person come by, said they actually listened to the podcast and they were enjoying them. So that's encouraging.
We must be doing something right then.
Yeah, and like I said, even if one person benefits, it's worth the effort, because you just never know when you plant seeds who these seeds are touching. And everyone has a different perspective and different approaches, work with different people and getting news out and different opinions out for people. So I'm glad everyone's listening. So I'm glad they're here.
Yeah. You guys were out of town this weekend.
Yes.
What was going on?
My son, Jake, is a swimmer. Now, my daughter, Kelly, is out of town, too. She's in Spain. She's finishing up her week in Malaga, Spain. She's learning Spanish there. Mm-hmm. She majors in international relationship. Then she's going to come home this next Wednesday. She's going to stay 3 or 4 days, and then she's going to go off to her fall semester. It starts in early July in New Zealand. So she's going to go over there and study, starting her junior year. So she's moving right along.
A big upperclassman now.
Yeah, but in New Zealand now, it's actually the winter. So it's actually cold. And she's going to be on the coast there at Otago University. It's sort of a Oxford type university. It's the oldest university in New Zealand. And New Zealand's a very beautiful place. I was fortunate to go there a few years ago. Just a very beautiful place. But she's going to be far away, but luckily we have cell phones.
Yeah.
So we can communicate. Now, Jake
was swimming, right?
Yeah, Jake. We went down to Auburn University. That's where they had the big swim meet this year. And Jake's 16 now. He's a junior at Macaulay School here in Chattanooga. And he really enjoys swimming. I don't think I could swim 2 or 3 hours a day in the pool, but Jake loves to swim. His stroke's the backstroke, and he did really well this weekend in the backstroke. But we had to drive down there, and driving back home last night wasn't the funnest thing, but we got here on time. And then luckily today we had a good day at work. Everything went smooth. There were no hitches. And now we're getting ready to make some podcasts that I hope everyone will benefit from and learn from. Podcasts are a growing new trend. We didn't have this years ago. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking back the other day, Nick, what are some things that you didn't have that you have now that you didn't have when you were growing up? Can you think of any?
We had computers when I was growing up, but we certainly didn't have cell phones, and the computers didn't really do nearly as much for us as they do now. When
I first, grew up, I can remember us having a black and white television that we had to change the knobs with. Mm-hmm. We had record players, which they don't have anymore. We did have telephones. They don't have those anymore. Well, it's pretty much cell phones. You don't have landlines.
Not as many landlines.
Yeah, not as many landlines anymore.
That's true.
But we didn't have computers. We didn't have texting. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have this technology. We didn't have this ability to reach so many people with information. Mm-hmm. Back then and there, you went to the doctor, and what he said was it. You didn't have all this information free for all.
Right.
In some ways, it made the world easier. But in some ways, it was a more secretive world. What your doctor said, the individual doctor, that was law. What he said was it. You didn't question him.
Right.
And there was no way to get any other information, really. I mean, how do you get it? Patients didn't have access to medical texts. They didn't have access to the original research. Mm-hmm. They didn't even know about side effects of medicines. Doctor said, here, medicine, take it. You took it. No questions asked.
Yeah.
And that hasn't been that long ago. So the world has really changed. The world we live in has been changed, not on a medicine basis, but all aspects. And I think the only constant out there anymore is change. Things are changing daily.
Quite rapidly.
Yes, very rapidly.
Well, we had a nice, easy weekend. We just had a birthday party for one of my boys.
Did you bounce on the trampoline?
We bounced on the trampoline. So I got him a new trampoline. I talked to my wife, and we decided that was the birthday present for all of us boys, myself included.
But that must have been the best present ever now.
Yeah. Well, it's quite nice and relaxing. We just go out there, and the boys wear themselves out before dinner, and then we have some dinner, and then bath time in bed, and it's working out well so far.
Good. It looks pretty solid. I saw it the other day. It looks like it's solid. I'm gonna come and bounce on that one day. But I'm afraid if one side bounces, the other side's going to bounce too.
We'll work it out.
Okay.
Well, you mentioned driving back from Jake's swim meet wasn't the most fun thing to do, but we do whatever we need for our kids, right?
That's right. And we sacrifice, and everyone out there can identify with children or grandchildren or whatever. Family's important. And I can't illustrate, the importance of keeping families strong. And that's really, at the core of our society is learning things about health and about how to stay healthy, about the spiritual life, about how to relate in families. So I want to encourage families to keep making it a priority. It's a good thing.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to steal your copy of the book here. We've got a copy of Medicines That Kill, which is a book you wrote a couple years ago before the Biblical Prescription Study Guides. Yeah. And tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this book.
Well, Nick, I wrote that in about 2013, but I did the research in about 2012. And at that time, I had seen I had a slew in my practice of several people that had overdoses and died from medications. One person had a narcotic overdose. They took too many narcotics, they quit breathing. And that time, narcotics were very rampant. Now we have some more information out now, but a few years ago, people were just taking narcotics like crazy. Someone had died from an antibiotic complication, just taking a complication from an antibiotic. They had an anaphylactic reaction. But what really did it was one person in my practice was taking medicines for a heart rhythm. And they got a notification. Now, this is after they had a severe complication that the pill that they were taking had 4 times the amount of medicine in it.
Wait a second. So they weren't taking extra pills.
No.
Just the pill was 4 times stronger dose than it should have been.
Someone had figured out they'd had some very bad complications, and they sent this patient a letter saying this medicine had 4 times the active ingredient in it. Be very careful. It could kill you.
Yeah.
And here we're prescribing it thinking that these medicines are perfectly safe. So this came at a time where I started questioning, medicines in greater detail. I'm always sort of skeptical about it, but I wanted to really understand what is the place for medicines? What is the risk benefits? And I said, well, what does a patient have to understand, to look at, to know about these things? And I looked and they had very little, okay? They could go to this big book here. This is called the physician desk reference. And they could go to this, and this has every medicine out there, talks about the drug interactions and more stuff than most people would want to read. Right. And after you read this, you'd be scared to death to take anything. Yeah. It tells about all the interactions, the death, the overdosage, what to do, gives you colors of the pill. So this is very complex, and they make a new one every year for people to look at. It's called physician desk references. The physicians are supposed to read these and know this.
In all your spare time.
Yeah, in all your spare time. But if you look at how many pages there are, let me see here. And this is small writing too. Yeah. I mean, this is not major writing.
They probably don't give you page numbers just to keep you.
Here's 3,104.
Oh.
And these are very small pages, and it covers all the different medicines out there. And so anyway, this is about what people have to look if they want to. In the early days, they didn't have computers to look at that condense things. The doctors for sure didn't go over all this in the office. So I said, we need another resource. We need something more out there. So with that involved, I said, well, I'm going to write something that's basic for patients, for people to understand medicines, but not only to understand how to use them correctly, but to learn a little bit about some of the dangers in medicines. So with that, I did the research on it, and out came Medicines That Kill. And a lot of people didn't like this book when it came out. I mean, because it was very honest. And I asked this question, let me ask you a question. What do Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Heath Ledger, John Belushi, Chris Farley, and Nicole Smith, Elvis Presley, Sigmund Freud, and many others have all in common? All of these people had complications and died from medications. Right. So I said, well, this is a problem with this. And then a few years ago, Nick, they had a medicine called Thin for weight loss. And people were just gobbling that up. They were losing weight on it. But then they found out that it had serious complications and people were also dying from it. And it was yanked off the market. And I said, well, let me see how many people are actually being hurt by medicines each year. So I started to do the research. And I looked at the deaths from medications, and I was surprised. And I'm going to quote, in 2000, the Institute of Medicine said there were about 98,000 deaths a year just from medical errors of all sorts. In 1997, that was several years ago now, right. Lucian Leap estimated that the drug error rate at 3 million with an annual fatality rate of 420,000. That's just from mistakes made. Lazaro and Sue estimate 106,000 deaths annually from adverse drug reactions in the hospital. Still, another estimate that 199,000 deaths from outpatient drug reactions. So if you add all these deaths, which I did, from adverse drug reactions in hospitals to outpatient deaths, the approximately deaths per year, were about 720,000 deaths a year.
Now, is that just from proper use, or are we talking about drug abuse as well?
Both.
Okay.
Mistakes, adverse drug reactions, interactions, people taking them wrong, prescribing them wrong, 720,000. Wow. That was more than heart disease. So you could easily make an argument that the leading cause of death in America is medications.
Yeah.
Now, if this is such a big problem, we hear about heart disease and we make a big deal about heart disease. Well, what can we do to lower the death rate? And there's lots of studies and lots of people talking about it, lots of attention. Cancer is another leading cause of death. People are talking all the time about how to screen for cancer, lower the risk of cancer, how to treat it, prevent this from happening. We hear it on motor vehicle accidents quite a bit. We hear it about mental health illnesses. But if this is killing more than anyone else in the world, shouldn't we be making a big emphasis on medicines and giving people skills and alerting people to the problem and teaching them how to lower their risk at all levels, including the doctors that are giving them the adverse reactions, the drug companies? Shouldn't we be making a big deal about this? Right. Well, that was my point. No one was making a big deal about it. And yet it was killing and causing lots of problems in our society. So, if a jet went down, people would say, hey, let's look into the safety of a jet. Let's see what caused it to come down. And yet that is such a small percentage that's going to happen to you. Yes. I mean, comparatively to, so deaths related to drugs. You look at 700,000, shouldn't that be looked at in great detail? Yeah. Well, it hadn't been done. So I said, I'm going to write this book and talk about the dangers of medicine. Now, I'm not saying people should never use medicines, but I'm saying that in this book that people need to use it responsibly, realizing that there's dangers and things that can lower your risk. Just like if you were in a car, Nick, you would wear a seatbelt. You wouldn't do the cell phone. You'd keep, the traffic laws. But when you're driving in a car, there's rules to protect you. Well, similarly, there needs to be guidelines and rules that people can understand that protect us from medicines if they are indeed deadly, which we proved in this book. Absolutely. So in the short picture, that is why I wrote the book. And in this book, I give people common sense ways to take medicines, what medicines to be careful about, what are some of the dangers. And it's very interesting, even though I wrote this 3 or 4 years ago, just last week, I was reading that the FDA has recommended that a certain narcotic now be pulled off the market. So why is that recommendation? Because it's dangerous. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous drug, and people are abusing it. And nowadays, they've cut down narcotics. That was one of the leading causes of death that I found out, is people overdosing on narcotics. Now, those were legal prescriptions that are addictive prescriptions that are people are taking inappropriately. They get addicted to it. They get into these pleasure traps. So that is now becoming a big deal. But it took how many years before it became a big deal and how many lives were killed.
Right.
So nowadays they're replacing that now with opium or things that they, heroin, other types of narcotics that are much cheaper. Mm-hmm. So that was a few years ago, but I could go on and on about medicine. In this book, some of the chapter titles that we wrote about, we talked about medical mistakes, adverse reactions, the misuse, slow kill. Over-the-counter medicines are dangerous too. A lot of people don't realize that the number one cause of fatal acute liver disease was overdose of Tylenol, which has a substance called acetaminophen in it. The number one causes of GI bleeding from the belly, was taking non-steroidals, which you can get over the counter.
Right.
A lot of people take all these energy drinks, which can cause dangerous rhythm problems over the counter. So you can get things over the counter legally that are dangerous too. So I talk about all of that people should know in simple terms. And then I talk about practical things. Let's get practical. What are medicines you have to use? And if you have to use them, how can you use it safely? Mm-hmm. So if someone's interested, this book is still in print. Tyndale has it out there. They can get it on Amazon. They can get it off our website. But I think it's a good resource to use. Now more people are talking about it, but still the only book I know that gives people a simple resource to understand medicines and give it a proper balance.
Right.
So many people out there are selling, pharmaceuticals don't really want to hear this because they're selling medication. When you go to medical school, they call it medical school because they talk a lot about medications. But we don't talk about the dangers. It's not popular. It's not popular to say, well, medicines might have killed over 700,000 people per year.
Right.
That's not popular.
Yeah.
But other people are jumping on the bandwagon, Nick, and I'm going to tell you, this is for the Harvard Men's Health Watch. And it's in this article just this last couple of weeks, don't get sold on drug advertising. Right, here it is. And then it talks about, last year, 5.2 billion were spent on advertising. 2012, about when this book was at, 3.2 billion. Only 2 countries allow you to directly advertise medications. That's the United States and, believe it or not, New Zealand.
Right, yeah.
But anyway, when you add up the prescription costs, why this is a big deal, 17% of total healthcare spending in 2015 is from medications.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to take it a step further. So this is from a reputable, this is the FDA Food and Drug, people that are our watchdogs that are watching after us. Just like we make recommendations on how to drive a car or how to live safely, this is the watchdog group. They're supposed to make safety recommendations. So here's when they're talking about drug ad. These are questions people should ask, drug ads. What condition does this drug treat? Why do I think I have this condition? If I have this condition, am I part of the population the drug is approved to treat? Should I take this drug if I have another condition as well? Should I take this drug if I'm taking other drugs? What are the drug's possible side effects I should be concerned about? Are there other drugs or less costly drugs that treat my treatment? Do the drugs for my condition have different side effects? So those are questions they recommend people to ask. But here's the most important question. What else can I do to help with my condition so I don't have to take these in the first place and take risk?
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't say risk, but it says that.
Right.
And this is, how can I learn more about this condition of this drug?
You raised a good point there. The last one, you said they asked you as the patient to consider what else you could do besides taking the medication.
That was one of the last things on the list. I think that should be one of the first things on the list.
Why is it, do you think, in our society that we don't take personal responsibility to look and see what other kind of choices we have besides just, I'm going to just take this pill?
Well, I've thought about that many times through the years, Nick, and because people are wanting to believe what they hear in the media too much, and they want a quick fix. And if someone says, here, take this pill, this is going to cure your condition, it's going to make everything better, you don't have to do anything.
Right.
That's the easiest path. And if you trust that person, you're going to do it. And you're going to do it again and again and again, even if that might not be the best thing for you. So I think each person has to look for truth in their lives and have the alternatives. So when a patient comes in for me, many times, Nick, I'll tell them, listen, we have 2 ways to handle this. This is a condition where we want to treat your symptom. Once a treatment's stable, we can either get at the cause and it's going to take this, this, and this to treat the cause. And for chronic disease, we can almost always treat the cause with some type of lifestyle change. We can either do that, or we can take medicines that will treat the symptom and cause side effects and potential harm and not get at the cause. Now, I know you can't do everything at once, but I'll walk you through this one step at a time if you so want to do this. So the choice is yours. So I sort of lay it out that way, but you can't believe everything you hear about medications. Medications are dangerous. They can cause severe adverse effects, including death. There's not one medication that doesn't have a side effect. Hopefully the risk outweigh the benefits of these medications, but it behooves the patient to learn everything they can about a medication, the risk, benefits, and ask the question, is there anything I can do so I don't have to take this risk?
Yeah. Now I want to get to a biblical prescription and look at this from a scriptural lens, through a scriptural lens. But before we do that, let's talk just a few minutes about what are some of the most common medicines that you use and what the appropriate place is for those and what the risks are.
Well, one of the ones I use a lot are the blood thinners. And there's many different blood thinners for many different reasons. For instance, if there's a clot in the body that could move from place to place, let's say there's a clot in the heart that could be pumped into the brain, which could cause a stroke. Well, we have medications that thin the blood out. Several of them are out there. One of them is called Coumadin or warfarin. They have the new agents. One's called Pradaxa. One's called Eliquis. One's called Xarelto.
Why are there so many different ones?
Well, because it's different companies, like why is there so many different shirts? Why different shirts company?
They all just kind of do the same thing?
Many of them have the same mechanisms. Some claim to have a little advantage over this or a little bit of that. For instance, Coumadin or warfarin, that one has to be monitored more frequently. You have to go in and get your blood checked. Greens interfere with that.
Okay, but leafy greens.
Leafy greens can interfere because it works with vitamin K. Whereas the new medicines, sometimes it's not as easy to stop the bleeding. It's not monitored as carefully, but it's easier to take. You can eat whatever you want. You don't have to get your blood test. So each one has an advantage. They do studies that show that this medication's better than that they throw it out there and they compete. It's a competition, like cars, which model's the best, and they all compete and the doctor has to sort through that through experience and knowledge and decide which medicine's the best. And then when it comes to an individual patient, whether the risk is worth the benefits. So that's just one class of medicines, the medicines that treat blood clots. The goal, of course, is not to get a blood clot, but if you have a blood clot, these are beneficial because it lowers the risk of stroke, lowers the risk of a clot in the leg moving to a lung. Those are potentially fatal things. So each of those blood thinner medicines, you have to look at the risk. The risk mainly is bleeding and interaction versus the risk of not having it, which is really a dangerous blood clot. So that medicine has a high risk benefit profile. There's other medicines, for instance, when we put a stent in, when a stent goes in, it's stainless steel, and the body sees that and wants to clot.
Right.
So while the skin heals over that stent, we try to protect against clotting again. So again, we have different medicines that we use for that. Aspirin's one of the lower ones. We have one called Plavix. We have one called Brilinta. There's many different medicines we use to block platelets. So as cardiologists, we use lots of blood thinners to help the blood not clot, but all of those blood thinners, the chief side effect is bleeding. So let's say you have a bleed, it's harder to stop a bleed, and a little blood becomes a lot of blood. And if a bleeding is in a closed container like your head, it can be fatal very quickly. Or if an aneurysm were to rupture or something to that nature, then bleeding can be very risky. So we have to talk about that, whether the risk is worth the benefits. But better than all of that is let's do things today so you might not have to have clots tomorrow. Just simple things for clots in the legs, like moving your legs every hour. If you're going on a trip, get up and move. Hydrate yourself, exercise, things of that nature. Protect your heart when you're younger so you don't have the heart attacks and the things that make the heart weak. Do things to help lower the risk of you developing a condition which causes clots in the heart called atrial fibrillation. And then if you do have it, understand the risk and benefits so you can take each of the medicines safely and also watch the drug interactions. Because sometimes, for instance, an antibiotic can make certain medicines become more potent. If the drug is metabolized in the kidneys and the kidneys aren't happy, a little dose of a medicine becomes a lot of dose of medicine quickly.
Right. Yeah.
If it's metabolized in the liver and you're drinking alcohol or doing other things to hurt the liver, that medicine can change the dosage profile very quick. So, and then of course you can mix and match medicines that are metabolized in the same way. So medications are very tricky. They all have risk and benefits. So that's just one of the medicines we have, Nick. We also have medicines that do the rhythm of the heart. And then we have to assess whether the rhythm is worth treating in the beginning and what's the safest medication and what are the dangers of the medicines.
Yeah. You said rhythm. Is that to speed up or slow down the heart rate?
Usually to slow down the heart rate.
Okay.
And there's different rhythms that we treat, from supraventricular tachycardia to atrial fibrillation. We have medicines that actually slow those and convert them to a normal rhythm. But each one of those medicines have fairly risky side effects. They have to be monitored. Now, over the last few years, when I started, we didn't have this ability, but now we can do a procedure called an ablation, where we can go up inside the heart with a catheter and destroy that rhythm so we don't have to take the risk of medicines. And for some people, that's very appropriate. So as you can see, in heart disease, everything's about the risk, benefits, but we want to teach people how not to have these dangerous rhythms earlier in life if they can.
Now, is that ablation that you mentioned, is that an electrical impulse or a mechanical mechanism?
Well, what happens is we go up inside, usually through the vascular system. We can map the heart out where it's coming from electrically. We put a lot of sensors in the heart, and then we see where that small circuit is, and we destroy it with sound wave energy usually.
Oh, wow.
So a little burst of sound wave disrupts the pathway, destroys that abnormal circuit, and then the heart sort of does its own thing.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
But so as you see, but each of them, now the medicines we use have very high risk, but they have very high rewards. I was talking to a patient today in the office. They had a condition called atrial fibrillation. And atrial fibrillation, if untreated for strokes, the top part of the heart goes like that, and then the blood doesn't pass through easily, you can get a clot. That clot can pump to the head, and you can have a stroke. That's devastating.
Yeah.
So which is riskier? The risk of having the stroke or the risk of bleeding? Well, this was a situation with this lady. I'm seeing her every 6 months. She's 84 now. Luckily for her, she's not falling. She's not dizzy. She knows how to take her medicines. She's smart. She's not having problems with the kidney or liver.
Good for her.
So she's still a good candidate to stay on it.
Yeah.
However, a few years ago, I had someone that was 94 years old on it, and she kept falling down and hitting her head. And she was going to damage her brain if we didn't stop it. Unfortunately, we stopped it, and only 6 months later, she had a stroke. So everything is about the risk and benefits, and you have to explain that to the patient, teach them how to use it carefully, communicate with them. A lot of people will take the medicines and not eat or drink. And so that changes your metabolism. So the medicine changes its dose once it gets in you. So and then sometimes when people get older, we forget our medicines. We forget how to take them correctly. And that poses risk too. So there's so many risk benefits of all the medicines. And that's why I wrote the book, Medicines That Kill. And if someone out there wants to learn more, it's a great gift for someone that's on a lot of medicines. It helps people get an overview rather than read 3,000 pages. You can get an overview, how to use it in 200 pages in Medicines That Kill. So that's why I wrote it. I wanted people to understand it. And we don't have forever to talk about this subject, but our next time we get together, I want to talk about specific medications from other fields.
That's right.
In heart, we talk a lot about blood thinners. We talk a lot about rhythm medicines. Those what we all use quite a bit. But we also wanted to. There's other medicines that we need to talk about as well.
Yeah. And that book is available, Medicines That Kill. Go to biblicalprescriptions.com and you can order your copy there, along with ordering more biblical prescription study guides or DVDs for your small group Bible study. Now, we've been talking about medicines and the dangers and the risks and how to balance those with the benefits of them. What does the Bible have to say on this? I mean, the Bible doesn't talk about specific medicines, but in general, what principles can we use to help us weigh those risks and benefits?
Well, if you think about the scriptures, the Bible is a book about God. Mm-hmm. It's a book about relationship with God and a loving God that came down here and wanted to explain himself and have a relationship with us. And I think that's the overall big key of what the Bible has to say. So once you have a relationship with God and you have these questions, there's a text in James, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask God. Mm-hmm. So as you ask God to lead you, sometimes he leads you to specific scriptures that can help you change your lifestyle so you don't need a medication. A biblical prescription, whether that be exercising or drinking water or eating the right foods or being happy. There's tons of biblical prescriptions that might help you not to have chronic disease. And then when it talks about when you get specific conditions, it might not address that directly, but it gives you an overall place to go. In the New Testament, Christ healed many people physically, but all the people physically eventually passed away.
Right.
You think about sometimes he had a chance to heal people. He says, no, I'm not going to heal. I want to go out and preach the gospel, and doing the Father's will was very important for Christ. It was at the top, and that was spreading the gospel of how you can come into a relationship. So real healing was when that person accepted Christ as their Savior and came into a relationship with God. That was healing.
Yeah.
That was the highest importance. And once a person understands that relationship, when you come into the presence of Christ, that is your healing, and that he gives you the power to see things and to learn things and to learn from the right source of knowledge, then everything starts falling into place. Even if you have a complex disease that the Bible doesn't talk about directly, you can still ask Christ to lead you to the right place, to give you biblical principles to help, to maybe keep you from it, and help you know the proper place for modern medicine, the proper place for treatment, the proper place for being careful. So even though the Bible isn't a medicine book, it gives us recommendations of where we can go for answers and how God can lead us. Even though it's not a book about science, it applies to that because it gives us the source of where we can go for truth and how God can work in us and help us find out the truth that we need in our lives.
Yeah, and that relationship with Christ really gives us perspective on everything in life,
Yes.
Whether, we're looking for direction on what we should do about this sickness or illness or disease or whatever, that relationship with God is paramount above everything else. And then you can just pray and ask that he will give you directions on how to proceed, and then trust that he will do that as you move on in your
That's right.
treatment.
And just trust and faith in God leading you. That is a biblical prescription because he's going to take you where you need to go. And even, sometimes I've seen this many times that God uses illness to heal us. Because when we're sick and when we're having problems, when we don't know what to do, that's when we turn to him for the answers. And he will provide answers to people and help guide them to the people that they need to do to find eternal healing as well as physical healing, if that's possible. But even if we can't have physical healing, we can have eternal healing.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the positive message that we have today. Even though medicines are dangerous and they're scary and they seem to be on the rise and 17% of all dollars are spent on it, we don't make a big deal about something that's killing lots of people. It's disturbing that we should talk more about this, and that's why I wanted to bring it up once again, that medicines are a big deal. We talk a lot about everything else. We need to talk about medicines, but we also, even more than that, we need to talk about eternal healing and where we can find that and where we can find answers to the eternal questions that we should be having and not so much the short-term answers of today.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Marcum, thanks for sharing Medicines That Kill with us and a little snippet from the book and giving us a little bit better perspective on how to approach the risks and the benefits when it comes to medication.
Okay, my pleasure, Nick.
And that's all we've got on today's podcast. Thanks for joining us. If you have a question you'd like to submit and have Dr. Marcum answer on a future podcast, you can submit that at biblicalprescriptions.com/podcast. And we'll get that on one of our next episodes of the podcast. Thanks so much. And we look forward to joining you again next week to discuss more about getting well and going home.